Places hold memories. They influence behaviors. The characteristics of a place, whether physical or psychological, can direct the activities and conduct of those occupying it. In a speech regarding the reconstruction of the House of Commons after World War II, Winston Churchill posited that, quote, "We shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us," end quote. The layouts of cities and constructions of buildings inform behaviors and expectations. The context of place plays an important role in our development as individuals and as a society. But this exchange does not become a stagnant or one-directional relationship. There exists a dynamic, reflexive relationship between bodies and space, as both entities continue to respond to and mold one another over time. Tonight, I would like us to consider the possibilities of activating and transforming spaces through dance. Anthropologist Tim Ingold speaks of placeness and how it's derived through the actions and behaviors associated with that space. So as we perform actions and tasks in our daily life, this abstract concept of space becomes a place that we know. So in this, I want us to think of sight dance. Sight dance can offer new modes of interaction with place, or expose existing relationships, which can draw attention to the dynamics between bodies and space for spectators and potentially result in a change in association. So, sight dance. Site-specific, site-sensitive, sighted are all terms used to denote different levels of relationship between a dance, its content, and its setting. I'm going to use the term sight dance pretty much throughout tonight just to consider dances that use sites in the urban public landscape. In my current research, I'm continuing to investigate how sight dance holds the potential to function as an agent of social change by drawing attention to the cultural context of sight, their import or invisibility to a community, and their potential for future engagement or activation. In this, I've been looking at different physiological, philosophy, anthropological, a lot of different theories to go through how place, dance, and spaces associated with daily life can prompt viewers to experience that sight differently. Through its high degree of embodiment and phenomenological engagement for both viewers and performers, sight dance holds strong potential for engaging community awareness and individual agency, and supporting social change as viewers tend to recognize and experience the power of their actions, let alone their presence, in constructing the characteristics of a place. And just to take a step back in terms of sight dance, I'm generally looking at dance that's going to be performed outside of the theater venue. Like I mentioned today, I'm looking specifically in the public realm. So contemporary funding and programming trends, such as creative placemaking and other civic initiatives, recognize the possibilities for changing cultural perceptions of places through artistic and other interventions that alter both the physical appearances of places and modes of community engagement therein. These programs, which are sometimes permanent and sometimes utilize more of a pop-up structure, reveal to a community the potential of a public space and offer new conceptualizations of the site, which in many cases can result in engendering new pride and ownership in the place. Many times this is addressing the concept of habitus, and so these efforts aim to transform community behaviors into positive, desirable modes of engagement that activate and sustain new dynamics of the site and allow more permanent changes to the places as the now engaged public supports further positive developments. Dance, however, is many times left out of this conversation. So we hear of parks going into maybe disarray, that maybe there's a drug element, there's something that the community wants to address, and by coming in and putting in a playground or holding festivals, the community kind of re-engages and reclaims that space. But dance and performance are not usually addressed in these conversations, but sight dance can help community members to become aware of how the physical and psychological characteristics of places can develop and spur them to alter their own behaviors as a way to transform the spaces of their everyday lives. California-based Anna Halprin, who we heard about earlier, has engaged public spaces throughout her career and is seen by many as a predecessor to later sight dance movements. Beyond a personal preference and passion for dancing outdoors, Halprin has utilized public spaces to address issues of import to her community and to alter a community's relationship to a place. Created in 1980, planetary dance exemplifies the potential for dance to activate and heal a community. In response to a series of murders by an individual nicknamed the Trailside Killer and the subsequent closure of Mount Tamalpais, Halpern decided to reclaim the mountain through a dance performance with the community. Starting at the top of the mountain, the participants came down the mountainside, making offerings at the sites where 7 women were murdered. About a week later, the killer was caught after he'd been on the loose for 2 years. It became a myth in the community that the dance had led to his capture. While Halpern does not fully make this claim herself, she recognizes the power of dance to bring awareness, healing, and empowerment to a community. The mountainside that had become static, if not foreboding, was enlivened once again, and Mount Tamalpais was reclaimed as a living site and an inviting site. And I'll just note that if you're interested, the planetary dance will happen, the 36th annual actually, this June 5th. So you can go partake yourself. Now, even when citizens are not directly engaged in a site performance, bearing witness to dance in public spaces still engages the public and individual consciousness in a unique way. And not unlike public protests or riots, dance in a public setting reminds viewers of the power of the human body in its environment, and how its very presence and action can function as a force that questions assumptions about behavioral decorum, uncovers structures of power, and on occasion heals trauma, pain, or unrest. Take, for example, another work by Halpern that brought attention to larger issues around the politics of space. Blank Placard Dance, also still performed to this day, features a group walking on public streets carrying blank protest signs. In their march, the participants collect protest statements from individuals they encounter, and then they write them on the signs for their walk back as a way to give voice to issues of concern to actual community members. In its first mounting in 1967, however, Halpern and the San Francisco Dancers Workshop had not pursued a legal permit to protest or gather. As a result, to avoid being jailed or fined, the participants had to stand 10 feet apart, according to city regulations on lawful versus unlawful assembly. The structured formulaic separation of the dancers countered notions of public space being open and available, and brought attention to the larger politics of space and the at times invisible boundaries of control and access structuring our daily activities and interactions. Site dance can reveal to a community its routines for acting in and navigating through a particular place, either by reinforcing typical movements or demonstrating new possibilities for interactions with that place, and thereby bring self-awareness to a viewer's cultural values, societal expectations, and personal assumptions associated with those places and the sites they're in. Postmodern choreographer Trisha Brown emerged as a creator of early site dance, before it was even used as a label to describe her practices. Inspired by her studies with Halpern and investigations with Judson Dance Theater, Brown wanted to explore the potential of dance outside of traditional concert venues such as proscenium theaters. In line with the larger artistic ethos of her time, Brown strove to offer art in the context of daily life. In her unprecedented activation of public space, bringing attention and energy to overlooked and arguably underutilized areas of the New York landscape, she brought a new focus to the body's role and presence. An early piece by Brown, Man Walking Down the Side of a Building, featured a man suspended by one rope walking down the facade of a building, defying gravity, encountering standard modes of interaction with the environment. Employing an everyday activity, walking, in this unconventional setting, Brown brought new focus to the interaction of the body and space. This work, particularly its restaging a few years later, also addressed the access to local geography for the Soho community. In its first iteration, audiences needed special information in order to even see the performance. In its restaging, it was a more public and accessible event. In this and other early works, Brown demonstrated an interest in the socio-political implications of space and in viewing, standing as a poignant example of the developing interest in audience perspective and experience, as well as the artistic engagement with the environment as a living entity. Brown demonstrated site dance's ability to delve deeper into the activation of places, demonstrating how dance can infuse areas generally ignored, trivialized by, if not physically inaccessible to, humans. Brown's roof piece also offered a new concern with the relationship between artist and audience, choreographer and site. Staged on the roofs around Brown's Soho apartment, the piece featured dancers costumed in red against the industrial and barren roof landscape, with New York as the larger backdrop. The dancers, positioned on different rooftops, engaged in a silent relay of movements, expanding the spectator's sense of perspective and distance and bringing attention not only to the movements of the dancers, but also the overlooked components of Soho. Contemporary philosopher Albanoe suggests that, quote, "the defining feature of the body's sensual presence is the way it resides, usually in the background. If we are to hope to bring this pervasive feature of our lives, ourselves, into focus, then we need to actively withdraw from our habitual engagement with the world around us. We need somehow to let the body itself crowd into the space of our attention and let it be felt," end quote. Withdrawing from typical interactions with the environment, Brown spurred audience to see, experience, and engage with Soho in new ways. She brought the body's presence back into focus and revealed sight dance potential for enlivening the larger cultural landscape and our connection to it. She really pulled the performers and audiences back into the real world, the known landscape, and established a new framework not only to view dance, but also the spaces of daily life. It was not a new view relating merely to sight or perspective, but really about an experiential view. Sight dance not only anticipates, but more importantly promotes that viewers and audience members attend to and experience the phenomena or sensorial possibilities of a space in which the dance is performed. Our bodies serve as our connection to the world. They allow us to make meaning. They are our sites of perception and experience. So perhaps offering less abstraction, the dance on formalized stages, sight dance generates a strong claim for being a phenomenological art form that can induce a higher state of engagement and embodiment for audiences. So socially and physiologically, watching other humans move through space, spectators may see themselves reflected in the actions of the dancers. Today we often hear this concept referred to as kinesthetic sympathy or empathy. And from philosophers to dance critics alike, we hear how observers may physiologically experience an action just by watching another person perform that movement. Researchers in neuroscience refer to it as a result of simultaneous activation of brain areas in the viewer and in the doer. So this is where I start questioning beyond my own experience and having some of this happen, where I might be watching another dancer perform, and I just can almost feel that movement. I can experience with them as they're going through the movements, through an environment, and started questioning myself what that was really all about. So starting in the 1980s and 90s, a group of neurophysiologists were working in Italy, and they started to do research with monkeys, sticking electrodes in the brains. And they were seeing if there was certain control with hand-mouth coordination that they were seeing not only when the monkeys were performing the actions themselves, but when they were observing others performing those same actions, and seeing certain areas in the brain activated, whether they were the watcher or the doer of those activities. And so this continued. Trying to go forward a little bit later. Closer in 2002, there was a new study that reported that both in humans and monkeys, this mirror neuron system was responding, that we were seeing this similarity. So I myself started wondering, how can we activate through dance what we want others to see? So with my personal experience, I wanted to get into what is maybe the practice of this. If we see this happening, and again, I cannot speak to all the science behind it, but what is this, these mirror neurons, that we're seeing things and we're having that same relational experience in the brain? So how can we extrapolate to our own experience and imagine the sensory effects of the interaction that a dancer is happening and potentially have those parallel sensations? And what does this mean for meaning making in sight dance? So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and talk about how I started implementing this. So in 2010, Joanna Hygood's Zacco Dance Theater took to the streets of San Francisco and staged Sailing Away in the heart of bustling Market Street. Performed in part for an essentially accidental or incidental audience of citizens and tourists who unexpectedly encountered the dance among the public street, Sailing Away interjected itself into the lived experience of the community in ways interrupting daily life. In so doing, the work brought new attention to the history of places it activated. The sites chosen for Sailing Away addressed 8 prominent African American settlers who were involved in a mass exodus from California in 1858 and challenged audiences to consider the changing or unchanging conditions, both physical and socioeconomic, experienced by the populations who have occupied and worked on those various sites. But beyond racial and socioeconomic concepts, the dance engaged the environment as a living, changing entity. One viewer who was reviewing this in an article, talked later about she found herself standing on this spot that was now a pier, that at the time of the individuals that were the characters in the performance, it would have been actually bay. So as she was learning a little bit more about the history of the sight dance and of the characters behind the concept of the work, really started thinking of this engagement of not only the people, but the environment and how it has changed. And I wanted to start investigating that if you have a sight dance that is not just an abstract movement, but really offering history and offering ideas to the viewers, how the movements can help them bring this history to life, potentially bring a new personal relationship with space. So I'm going to play a video and talk over it. So at Mills College, I did research on a lot of these forgotten sites around campus that had a much stronger history before my time there. And in looking through the archives and working with special collections, I pulled together not only some stories and quotes, but also imagery that I could find. And essentially did a walking performative tour. So at moments I would be speaking with the audience, sharing with them these stories, sharing with them the images that I had collected, and then at times we would just watch the dance and allowing them to draw their own connections between the movements, between the spaces, between the stories, and allowing that to unfold. Part of it, I also started working with the dancers and recording through some informal studies their own experiences with the site. And a lot of them were sites, again, that had been overgrown on campus, and people had once gathered there for all of these traditions, for picnics, for bonfires, and over the years those traditions had faded away. So on first viewing, if you might say it that way, I would ask the dancers to fill out the survey of how they knew the space, if they did, any histories, any relationship to it. And then I would share with them the histories. And then on the second visit, they might fill out that survey again, and just kind of tracking how perceptions of the spaces changed for them, these dancers that were involved. And their environmental sounds that affected the But for me, just using this very much as a case study to start testing out some ideas for myself, but what it could mean that if there was a community, if there was a site that you wanted to activate, that you wanted to change a community's perception of, how that could be done beyond just the performance. That when someone walks into that space at a future time, not only do they have that memory, that recall of what they saw, but also the story and the information that you provided to them, and how over time that could be used to create a new engagement and a new activation that they would carry on. So, just to conclude, I wanted to talk a little bit. Scholar and dancer Sansan Kwan acknowledges that the act of creating and performing dance in turn creates culture and one sense of place. In her book, Kinesthetic City, she talks about a performance that H.T. Chen and dancers did, Apple Dreams, in 2007 as a way to bring healing to the New York Chinatown community in response to the prejudice and lack of resources encountered in the years following 9/11. She summarizes, quote, "Choreography is an art of space. Making dances creates place. Choreography, as a process of bringing bodies together in space and time, can forge new places across old geographies, turning difference into community," end quote. So here, instead of seeing bodies and spaces as separate entities, I hope that sight dance can help us recognize these elements as existing hand in hand and provide a platform by which audiences can likewise see and experience the potential of their future interactions with these sites and cultural places.